Ma'am, you don't get to rewrite the seating chart just because you don't like who's sitting in it. The words hadn't even finished echoing before she reached across the aisle and snatched the boarding pass straight out of his hand, her manicured fingers curling around it like she'd already decided the outcome, like the decision had never been his to begin with, and just like that, the quiet hum of the first-class cabin shifted, conversations died mid-sentence, a flight attendant froze near the galley, and every pair of eyes within a 10-row radius turned toward seat 2A where Ethan Carter sat. Calm, still, unmoving, dressed in nothing more than a fitted black t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn-in sneakers that didn't match the polished leather and tailored suits around him, and that was exactly why she had chosen him, exactly why her voice carried that sharp edge when she said, "This seat isn't yours," like it was policy, like it was fact, like it was something everyone else should have already known, and Ethan didn't flinch, not when she waved the ticket in front of the flight attendant. Not when she let out a short, disbelieving laugh, not even when she added, louder this time, "People like you always try this," because he had heard it before, different cities, different rooms, same tone, same quiet assumption dressed up as authority, and across the aisle a man lowered his newspaper just enough to watch, a woman 2 rows back reached for her phone but hesitated, unsure if this was worth recording or just another uncomfortable moment better ignored, while the flight attendant finally stepped forward, smile tight, voice rehearsed, "Sir, is there an issue here?" And before Ethan could answer, the woman cut in, "Yes, there is, he's in the wrong seat," her grip tightening on the boarding pass as if possession alone proved her right, and Ethan slowly turned his head, meeting the attendant's eyes, not hers, never hers, and said, evenly, "You might want to check the system," but the attendant didn't move, not yet, hesitation flickering across her face as she glanced. Between the two of them, weighing appearances, weighing tone, weighing something that had nothing to do with data and everything to do with perception, and the woman leaned in just slightly, lowering her voice but not enough to keep it private, "Trust me, there's no way. He's supposed to be up here," and that was when the air changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for those paying attention to feel it, a subtle tightening, like the cabin itself was holding its breath, and Ethan leaned back into his seat as if he had nowhere else to be, as if the clock on the wall didn't matter, as if the boarding door could close or stay open and it wouldn't change a thing, his eyes steady, unreadable, carrying the kind of calm that didn't come from confidence alone, but from something deeper, something earned over years of rooms like this, moments like this, decisions made by people who thought they understood power until they stood too close to it, and still he said nothing more, not yet, not when the attendant finally reached for her tablet, not when the woman folded her arms in quiet victory, not when the cabin leaned in just a little closer, waiting, because Ethan Carter had already seen how this played out, and he knew something no one else in that aisle did, not the woman, not the crew, not the passengers watching from behind half-lowered screens, something that sat just beneath the surface of the moment, waiting, patient, inevitable, and he let the silence stretch just long enough to make room for it. The attendant's fingers hovered over the tablet for a fraction too long, the kind of hesitation that did not come from confusion but from calculation, and Ethan saw it instantly, that quiet moment where a decision was not based on facts but on comfort, on who looked like they belonged and who did not, and when she finally tapped the screen her expression did not settle, it tightened, just slightly, just enough to confirm what the woman beside him had already assumed, and that was all it took. For the woman to exhale in satisfaction, a soft, victorious sound as she extended her hand expectantly and said, "Well," as if the answer had already been written before the question was even asked, and the attendant cleared her throat, voice measured, careful, "Sir, I am not seeing a confirmed assignment for this seat under your name," and the words landed exactly how they were meant to, not loud, not aggressive, but final enough to shift the weight of the room, and a murmur moved through the nearby rows. Like a ripple through still water, subtle but undeniable, while the man with the newspaper lowered it completely now, no longer pretending not to watch, and the woman 2 rows back lifted her phone a little higher, curiosity overcoming hesitation, because something about this did not feel routine, it felt staged, or worse, familiar, and Ethan let the silence sit for a beat before responding, not rushed, not defensive, just steady. "That is interesting," he said, his voice even, almost conversational, "because it was there when I checked in," and the attendant shifted her weight, glancing back at her screen as if it might change under pressure, but it did not, or at least it did not change in a way she was willing to acknowledge, and the woman beside him gave a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Of course it was," she said, turning slightly so others could hear. "They always say that," and there it was again, that word, always. As if this moment had already been categorized, filed away under a pattern she believed she understood, and Ethan finally turned his head toward her, really looked at her for the first time, not with anger, not even with frustration, but with a kind of quiet recognition, like he had seen this exact version of certainty before, in boardrooms, in lobbies, in places where people mistook confidence for correctness, and he asked one simple question: "Do you work for the airline?" And she blinked, just once, caught slightly off guard by the shift. Before straightening her posture and replying, "I do not have to work here to know when something is wrong," and that was when a second attendant approached from the front of the cabin, drawn by the tension, her expression more serious, less rehearsed, and she looked between them before asking, "What is going on?" And the first attendant answered quickly, almost too quickly, "We have a seating discrepancy," choosing her words carefully, neutral on the surface but already leaning in one direction, and the second attendant nodded, then turned to Ethan. "Sir, may I see your identification and boarding confirmation?" And Ethan reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, retrieving his phone and unlocking it with a calm that did not match the situation, pulling up the digital boarding pass and holding it out without a word, and for a brief second, just a second, the second attendant's eyes flickered, something passing through them that the others did not catch, something that looked a lot like recognition, but it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by protocol, by process, by the weight of expectation pressing in from every side, and behind them, near the galley, a young trainee stood frozen, watching everything unfold with attention she could not hide, her fingers tightening around her own device as if she was holding on to more than just a piece of plastic. And Ethan noticed her too, because he noticed everything, every glance, every pause, every moment where the truth tried to surface and was pushed back down, and still, he did not raise his voice, he did not argue, he simply said, "Take your time," as if time itself was the only thing he needed, and somewhere deep in the system behind that tablet, behind those screens, behind those quiet decisions, something had already begun to shift. The second attendant held Ethan's phone just a second longer than necessary, her eyes scanning the digital boarding pass with a focus that felt different from the others, less dismissive, more cautious, and when she looked back up there was something behind her expression now, something unsettled, like a detail that did not fit the narrative already forming in the cabin. But before she could speak, the first attendant stepped in again, her tone firmer this time, as if the presence of a colleague gave her authority more than certainty ever could. "That code does not match what we are seeing in the system," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet with a practiced confidence, and the woman beside Ethan let out another short laugh, louder now, encouraged. "Exactly," she added, crossing her arms as she leaned back into the seat that was not hers, settling in as if the situation had already resolved in her favor, as if the decision had already been made and all that remained was for Ethan to accept it. But Ethan did not move, not even slightly, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady, and that stillness began to draw more attention than any raised voice could have, because it did not match the role they had already assigned to him, it did not match the script they were expecting him to follow, and 2 rows back the woman with the phone finally pressed record, her thumb hesitating for only a fraction of a second before committing, because something about this moment felt like it needed to be remembered, not just witnessed, and near the aisle the man who had been reading earlier shifted forward in his seat, lowering his voice to the person beside him. "This does not look right," he whispered, but not quietly enough to go unheard, and the words lingered just long enough to create doubt, to fracture the certainty that had been building around the woman's confidence, while the young trainee near the galley took a small step forward, her hesitation battling with something stronger, something that had been building since she first heard the tone of the conversation, and she spoke, softly at first. "I remember that name," she said, almost to herself, but the second attendant heard it, her head turning slightly. "What did you say?" And the trainee swallowed, then repeated it, louder this time, "I remember his name from the system earlier," and the first attendant's expression tightened instantly, a flicker of irritation breaking through her composure. "Then you are remembering wrong," she replied quickly, too quickly, her words landing with a sharpness that did not invite discussion, only compliance, and the trainee froze, her confidence faltering under the weight of that response. But Ethan had already heard enough, already seen enough. The small cracks forming in the surface of what they were trying to present as fact. And he leaned forward slightly, just enough to bring his voice into the center of the moment without raising it. You might want to refresh that system, he said, calm as ever, because it is not just a seating chart you are looking at, and the second attendant's eyes flickered again, that same unsettled recognition surfacing for a brief moment before being pushed aside by procedure, by hierarchy, by the pressure of being watched. And behind them the cabin door remained open, a subtle reminder. That time was moving, that departure was approaching, that decisions made in moments like this did not stay contained, they carried forward, and the woman in Ethan's seat shifted slightly, her confidence still intact but now edged with something else, something thinner, less stable, as if the ground beneath her certainty had begun to soften, and still, Ethan Carter did not raise his voice, did not argue, did not demand, he simply watched as the room slowly realized it might have misread the man sitting quietly in seat 2A. The cabin did not return to normal, it could not after doubt had been introduced, not after certainty had been cracked open just enough for people to start questioning what they were seeing instead of accepting what they were told, and that shift was quiet but powerful, like a current moving beneath still water, and the second attendant felt it more than anyone, her grip tightening slightly around the tablet as she looked down again, scrolling this time, not just checking but searching. Her movement slower now, more deliberate, and Ethan watched without urgency, without pressure, because he knew exactly what happened when someone finally decided to look instead of assume, and beside him the woman's posture began to change, not dramatically, not enough for her to admit anything, but enough for the confidence in her shoulders to lose its sharp edge, replaced by something thinner, something that depended on the room continuing to agree with her, and when it did not, when the silence stretched without immediate confirmation, she spoke again, quicker this time, her voice carrying a hint of impatience. This is taking too long, she said, as if speed could replace accuracy, as if urgency could force a conclusion, and the first attendant nodded in agreement, stepping forward slightly. Sir, we need you to cooperate so we can prepare for departure, her tone more formal now, less conversational, and Ethan tilted his head just slightly, not in defiance but in quiet curiosity. Cooperate with what exactly? He asked, his voice calm, steady, controlled, and the question hung in the air longer than expected, because it did not have an easy answer, not one that sounded reasonable when spoken out loud, and the first attendant hesitated, just for a moment, before repeating, with relocating to your assigned seat, but even as she said it, the certainty behind the words had weakened, and the second attendant finally spoke, her voice lower, more cautious. There is a record, she said, almost under her breath at first, but loud enough for the others to hear, and the words landed differently than anything before them. They did not accuse, they did not demand, they revealed, and the first attendant turned sharply, her expression tightening. What do you mean there is a record, and? The second attendant glanced down again, then back up, her eyes moving from Ethan to the woman in the seat and back again. There was a record, she corrected, more carefully now, but it looks like it was modified, and that was the moment the room shifted again, more noticeably this time, the kind of shift that could not be ignored, because modification was not confusion, it was not error, it was intent. And the man across the aisle leaned forward openly now, no longer pretending, modified. How? He asked, his voice cutting through the tension, and the second attendant hesitated again, aware now of how many people were listening, how many people were watching, and the trainee near the galley took another small step forward, her voice steadier than before. It was there earlier, she said, more firmly this time. I saw it during pre-boarding, and the first attendant's composure began to crack at the edges, her tone sharpening. That is enough, she said, trying to regain control. Trying to pull the moment back into something she could manage, but it was already slipping, already moving beyond her reach, and Ethan leaned back again, his expression unchanged, his voice still calm. Systems do not change themselves, he said quietly, not accusing anyone directly but making the implication impossible to ignore, and the woman beside him shifted again, her hand tightening slightly on the armrest as she looked toward the attendants, then back at Ethan, her certainty no longer absolute, her voice lower now, less public. Are you saying this is some kind of mistake? And Ethan finally looked at her fully, his gaze steady, unhurried, and replied, no, with a calm that carried more weight than any raised voice could have. I am saying this is a decision, and somewhere in the distance, just beyond the open cabin door, a faint chime echoed through the aircraft, a quiet reminder that time was still moving forward, whether they were ready or not, and in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that this was no longer just about a seat, it was about something deeper, something that had already begun to unravel in front of them. The word decision did not fade when Ethan said it, it settled into the cabin like something heavier than sound, something that demanded to be acknowledged whether anyone wanted to or not. And for the first time since the confrontation began, no one spoke immediately, not the woman in his seat, not the first attendant, not even the second, because the implication behind that single word had shifted the frame of the entire moment. It was no longer about confusion or error or even misunderstanding, it was about intent, about choice. And choices had consequences that could not be smoothed over with polite language or procedural tone, and the second attendant looked back down at the tablet again, her fingers moving faster now, pulling up logs instead of summaries, digging deeper instead of skimming the surface, and the trainee edged closer, drawn in by something stronger than caution, her voice quieter but steadier than before. There should be a change history, she said, not asking, stating, and the second attendant nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes narrowing as she found what she was looking for. A line of data that did not belong, a timestamp that did not align. And she inhaled slowly before saying, there was an update made 3 minutes ago, and that was when the silence broke, not with noise but with movement, subtle shifts in posture, exchanged glances, the unmistakable sound of doubt spreading through a confined space, and the man across the aisle leaned back slightly, exhaling under his breath. 3 minutes ago, he repeated, disbelief lacing his tone, because everyone in that section knew what had happened 3 minutes ago. They had watched it unfold, they had seen the boarding pass taken, the assumption made, the narrative built in real time, and now the system itself was reflecting that moment, not correcting it but reinforcing it, and the first attendant's composure fractured further, her voice rising just enough to betray the pressure building beneath it. System updates happen all the time, she said quickly, too quickly, as if speed could cover the gap logic had left behind, but the second attendant did not look convinced. And neither did anyone else who had been paying attention, and the woman in Ethan's seat shifted again, this time more noticeably, her hand brushing against the armrest as if grounding herself, her voice lower now, almost careful. Are you implying someone changed it on purpose? And the question hung there, heavier than the last, because it carried with it the possibility that this was not just a mistake but an action. And Ethan did not answer right away, he let the question sit, let the room feel it, let the weight of it settle into every corner of that cabin before he finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, unshaken. I am not implying anything, he said, his gaze steady as it moved briefly to the tablet and then back to the people standing in front of him. I am observing, and that distinction mattered, because observation did not accuse. It revealed, and the trainee took a small breath, then added, more confidently now. The name was there before boarding completed, I checked it twice, and this time her voice did not waver, it held, supported by the evidence now sitting in the system itself, and the second attendant straightened slightly, her posture shifting from uncertainty to quiet alignment with what she was seeing, while the first attendant glanced toward the front of the cabin, as if looking for reinforcement, for authority that could override what was unfolding, and in that moment, the balance of the room tilted, not completely, not yet, but enough for the certainty that had once filled it to feel unstable, and Ethan leaned back once more, his hands resting calmly, his presence unchanged, but the energy around him different now, no longer defined by suspicion but by something closer to anticipation, because whatever had been set in motion behind the scenes, whatever system had been touched, whatever decision had been made, it was no longer contained, it was visible, and it was only a matter of time before it reached beyond that cabin and into a place where decisions like that could not remain hidden. The word visible changed everything, not instantly, not loudly, but in the quiet way truth always does when it begins to surface in a place built on assumptions, and the cabin no longer felt like a simple boarding area, it felt like a space under observation, like every action now carried weight beyond the moment, and the second attendant seemed to understand that more than anyone, her posture straightening, her tone shifting from uncertain to careful, deliberate. I need to report this, she said, not loudly, but with enough clarity to cut through the tension, and the first attendant turned sharply, her expression tightening in a way that revealed more than her words ever could. There is nothing to report, she replied. Her voice controlled but edged with something defensive, something that had not been there before, and that contrast did not go unnoticed, not by the passengers, not by the trainee, and certainly not by Ethan, who remained still, composed, watching the dynamic unfold exactly as he expected it to, because moments like this always followed the same pattern: denial before acknowledgement, control before collapse. And the trainee stepped forward again, this time not stopping herself, her voice clearer, steadier. "There is a log entry," she said, her eyes fixed on the tablet, "and it shows a manual override," and the phrase landed differently than everything that came before it, because manual override did not belong to error, it belonged to action, to intention, and the man across the aisle let out a quiet breath, shaking his head slightly. "That is not a glitch," he said under his breath, but loud enough for others to hear. And now the cabin was no longer divided between those who believed and those who did not, it was divided between those who were paying attention and those who were trying not to, and the woman in Ethan's seat felt that shift more than anyone, her confidence thinning with each second, her posture adjusting again, no longer relaxed, no longer certain, and she looked toward the attendants, searching for reassurance that did not come, and when she spoke, her voice carried something new, something closer to unease. "Can we just resolve this so we can take off?" And it was no longer a demand, it was a request, subtle but unmistakable, and Ethan finally moved, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to lean forward slightly, his hands resting calmly as his voice entered the moment again, low, controlled, impossible to ignore. "It will be resolved," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made people listen, not because it was loud, but because it carried certainty without effort, and the second attendant nodded slightly, almost unconsciously, as if aligning with that certainty, while the first attendant looked toward the front of the cabin again, this time more urgently, as if expecting someone to intervene, someone with authority strong enough to override what was unfolding, and that expectation did not go unnoticed either, because the trainee followed her gaze, then looked back at Ethan, her expression shifting from doubt to realization, like a puzzle piece finally falling into place, and she asked, quietly but clearly, "Who are you?" And the question did not echo, it settled, it anchored itself in the space between them, because it was no longer about a seat, no longer about a boarding pass, it was about identity, about presence, about the possibility that the man sitting calmly in front of them had been misread from the very beginning. And Ethan did not answer immediately, he let the question exist, let it grow, let the room lean into it, and somewhere beyond the cabin, beyond the open door, a distant voice called out a final boarding notice, a reminder that time was still moving forward, that decisions were still being made, and inside that cabin, every second now carried more weight than the last, because whatever answer came next was not going to just resolve a seating issue, it was going to redefine the entire moment. The question lingered in the air longer than anything else that had been said, not because it was loud, but because it was honest, stripped of assumption, stripped of certainty. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the room was not reacting, it was waiting, waiting for Ethan Carter to define himself in a space that had already tried to define him without asking, and he did not rush to answer. He did not fill the silence with explanation or defense, he let it stretch, let every I remained fixed on him, let every second build weight, because he understood something the others did not, that timing was not about speed, it was about control, and when he finally moved, it was minimal, deliberate, his hand reaching calmly into his pocket as he retrieved his phone again, not to prove anything to the attendants, not to argue with the system, but to connect to something beyond it. And he unlocked it with the same steady rhythm he had carried from the beginning, no urgency, no hesitation, and then he raised it to his ear, not dramatically, not as a performance, just as a decision already made. "This is Ethan," he said, his voice low, clear, grounded, and the name landed differently now, not as just a label, but as something that carried recognition for those who were paying attention, and the trainee's eyes widened slightly, the second attendant's posture shifted again, and even the man across the aisle leaned in just a little more, because something about the way he said his name did not match the version of him they had built in their minds, and Ethan continued, "Go ahead and pull up live access to flight manifest override logs for this aircraft," and there was no hesitation in his tone, no uncertainty, just instruction, precise and directed, the kind that did not ask for permission. And on the other end, whoever was listening did not question him, did not delay, because Ethan Carter did not sound like a passenger asking for help, he sounded like someone used to being answered, and the first attendant's composure tightened again, her voice stepping in quickly, almost reflexively. "Sir, you cannot make external calls regarding internal systems," but even as she said it, the authority behind her words had weakened, because the situation had already moved beyond what she could contain, and Ethan did not even look at her when he replied. "It is already internal," a quiet statement that carried more meaning than it explained, and the woman in the seat shifted again, her earlier confidence now replaced with something harder to hide, something closer to doubt, her eyes moving between Ethan and the attendants, searching for alignment that no longer existed, and the second attendant spoke again, this time with a different tone, less defensive, more aligned with what she was seeing. "What exactly are you requesting?" And Ethan lowered the phone slightly, just enough to respond. "Verification," he said simply, then added, "real time," and those two words changed the room again, because real time did not allow for delay, did not allow for quiet adjustments or unseen corrections, it brought everything into the present, exposed, undeniable, and the trainee took another step forward, her voice almost a whisper now, but steady. "If there is a manual override, it will show who did it," and no one corrected her this time. No one dismissed her, because now the system itself had become the center of the moment, not the assumptions, not the appearances, but the data, and Ethan returned the phone to his ear, listening for a moment, then nodding once, a small, controlled motion that carried confirmation without explanation, and when he spoke again, his voice was just as calm, just as measured, but now it carried something else, something final. "Thank you," he said, and ended the call, and the silence that followed was no longer uncertain, it was charged, because whatever was coming next was not going to be debated, it was going to be revealed, and for the first time since she had taken that seat, the woman did not speak at all. The silence after the call did not feel empty, it felt loaded, like the entire cabin was standing on the edge of something none of them could yet see but all of them could feel approaching, and Ethan did not rush to fill it, he did not explain, he did not justify, he simply sat there, grounded, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere far beyond the reach of the people standing around him. And for a brief moment the noise of the aircraft returned, the low hum of engines preparing, the distant echo of boarding announcements, but inside that section of the cabin, everything remained suspended, every glance sharper, every breath more deliberate, and the second attendant's tablet vibrated softly in her hand, a subtle signal that something had changed, and when she looked down, her expression shifted instantly, not dramatically, but enough for the trainee to notice. Enough for the man across the aisle to lean forward again, enough for the woman in the seat to straighten without meaning to, and the second attendant swallowed slightly before speaking, her voice lower now, controlled. "There is a priority flag on this passenger profile," she said, choosing each word carefully, and the first attendant frowned, her tone defensive. "Priority flags exist for many passengers," but the second attendant shook her head slightly, her eyes still locked on the screen. "Not like this," she replied. And that was when the tension deepened, not louder, but heavier. Because the system was no longer just showing a discrepancy, it was revealing hierarchy, something embedded, something structured, something that did not change based on appearance or assumption, and the trainee stepped closer, unable to hold back now, her voice quiet but clear. "What does it say?" And the second attendant hesitated, not because she did not understand it, but because she did, and saying it out loud would shift everything. And Ethan watched her, not with pressure, not with expectation, just with the same calm presence he had carried from the beginning. The kind of presence that did not need to force truth into the open because it knew truth had a way of surfacing on its own, and slowly, carefully, the second attendant read from the screen, "Executive access level, founder-linked authorization," and the words did not echo, they settled, heavy, undeniable, and for a second no one moved, no one reacted, because the meaning had to catch up to the moment, had to override everything they thought they understood, and the man across the aisle blinked. His voice barely above a whisper, "Founder," and the trainee's eyes widened fully now, recognition no longer hidden, no longer uncertain, and the first attendant's posture shifted again, this time not defensive, but uncertain, her earlier confidence unraveling under the weight of what she was hearing, and the woman in the seat turned slowly toward Ethan, her expression no longer sharp, no longer dismissive, but searching, almost cautious, as if she was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the information now unfolding around him, and Ethan finally spoke again, not loudly, not forcefully, just enough to bring everything into alignment. "Now you are seeing the full system," he said, his voice steady, and there was no anger in it, no satisfaction, just clarity. And outside the cabin door, the final boarding call ended, the signal that the aircraft was ready to close, ready to move. But inside that space, nothing felt ready, because what had started as a simple confrontation had become something else entirely, something that was no longer about a seat, no longer about a boarding pass, but about recognition, about truth, about the quiet realization that the man they had tried to move had never been out of place at all. And for the first time since she had spoken, the woman had no words left to say. The word founder did not just land in the room, it changed the temperature of it, the kind of shift that could not be undone by explanation or softened by tone, and for a moment the entire cabin seemed to forget how to move, how to react, because everything they thought they understood about the situation had just been replaced by something far more precise, far more permanent. And the second attendant did not look up right away, her eyes still locked on the tablet as if confirming it again would somehow make it less real, but it did not change, it only clarified, layers of access unfolding beneath the surface. And she finally lifted her gaze toward Ethan, not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with something closer to recognition, the kind that comes too late but arrives all the same. And the first attendant took a step back without realizing it, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by a quiet recalculation that showed in the way her shoulders lowered, the way her voice did not come immediately. And the trainee stood still now, no longer uncertain, her expression settled into something steady, something resolved, as if the question she had asked earlier had finally been answered in a way that left no room for interpretation. And across the aisle the man who had been watching let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly. "You have got to be kidding me," he murmured, not in disbelief of Ethan, but in disbelief of everything that had happened before this moment. And the woman in the seat felt it all at once, the shift, the weight, the realization pressing in from every direction, her posture no longer composed, her hand pulling slightly away from the armrest as if the seat itself had changed meaning beneath her. And she looked at Ethan again, but this time not with challenge, not with dismissal, but with something far less certain, something that searched for a way back to a moment that no longer existed. And when she spoke, her voice was quieter, careful in a way it had not been before. "I did not know," she said, the words falling flat, because they did not carry the same authority they once had. And Ethan met her gaze for a brief second, not to confront her, not to correct her, but to acknowledge the statement for what it was, incomplete, because this had never been about what she knew. And he replied, calm as ever, "That was never the point." And the words did not accuse, they revealed. And the second attendant straightened slightly, her role shifting in real time as she processed what she was now responsible for, her voice more formal, more aligned with the structure behind the system. "Sir," she began, then paused, adjusting her tone, "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the confusion," and the change in address did not go unnoticed, not by the passengers, not by the trainee, and certainly not by the first attendant, whose silence now spoke louder than anything she had said earlier. And the tablet in the second attendant's hand updated again, another notification, another layer of confirmation, and this time she did not hesitate to read it. "Corporate oversight has been notified," she said, her voice steady, and the words carried through the cabin with a weight that extended beyond the aircraft itself, because oversight meant visibility, meant accountability, meant that this moment was no longer contained within a single aisle or a single interaction. And Ethan leaned back slightly, his posture unchanged, his presence as calm as it had been from the beginning, but the room around him had transformed completely. And for the first time since she had taken that seat, the woman stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to create space where there had been assumption. And no one asked her to move, no one instructed her, because now the system had spoken, and it had said everything that needed to be said. The space where she had been sitting did not feel empty, it felt corrected, like something out of alignment had finally been placed back where it belonged. And no one rushed to fill it, no one spoke too quickly, because the moment demanded a different kind of awareness now, one shaped not by assumption but by consequence. And the woman stood just a step away from the seat, her posture no longer defined by certainty but by restraint, her eyes lowering briefly before lifting again, not to challenge but to process, to understand how quickly control could shift when the foundation beneath it changed. And Ethan did not move immediately, he did not reclaim the seat with any visible urgency, because he had never lost it, not in the way that mattered, and that was what the room was beginning to understand, that ownership was not always about presence, it was about position, about structure, about the unseen framework that defined what was real regardless of who recognized it, and the second attendant took a small step back, her tone now fully aligned with the hierarchy she had just uncovered. "Mr. Carter, your seat is ready," she said, the formality in her voice no longer procedural but intentional, and Ethan gave a slight nod, not as acknowledgement of permission, but as acknowledgement of order being restored, and he stood, calm, unhurried, adjusting his jacket slightly as if this had always been the next step, as if the entire sequence had simply been a delay, not a disruption, and as he moved forward, the aisle seemed to open without instruction, passengers shifting subtly, not out of obligation but out of recognition, the kind that does not require explanation once it is understood, and the man across the aisle lowered his gaze for a brief second, not out of avoidance, but out of respect, the kind that comes too late but still arrives, and the trainee stepped back toward the galley, her eyes still fixed on Ethan, not with curiosity anymore, but with clarity, as if she had just witnessed something that would stay with her long after the flight ended, and the first attendant remained where she was, silent, her earlier confidence replaced by something quieter, something that did not yet have words, and the woman watched as Ethan took his seat, her expression shifting again, not to regret, not fully, but to recognition, the kind that forces reflection whether it is welcome or not, and when Ethan finally settled into the seat, he did not look around, he did not scan the room for reactions, because he did not need to, the room had already adjusted around him, already redefined itself in relation to him, and the second attendant's tablet updated once more, a final confirmation that the system had stabilized, that the override had been corrected, that the structure now matched reality again, and she exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, before turning toward the front of the cabin, her voice steady, composed. "We are ready for departure," she said, and the words carried a different weight now, not just procedural, but symbolic, because something had been resolved, something deeper than a seating issue, something that extended beyond the aircraft itself, and as the cabin door finally closed, sealing the space, the moment did not disappear, it settled into memory, into awareness, into the quiet understanding that what had unfolded in those few minutes was not an exception, but a reflection, and Ethan Carter sat in silence, not victorious, not vindicated, just present, exactly where he had always been meant to be. The aircraft began to move, slow at first, a gentle push away from the gate that signaled the transition from stillness to motion, but inside the cabin, the energy had not returned to normal, it had shifted into something quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that follows realization rather than routine, and no one spoke too loudly, no one resumed their conversations with the same ease as before, because what had just unfolded lingered in the space between them, not as tension anymore, but as awareness, and the man across the aisle glanced once more toward Ethan. Before looking away, not out of discomfort but out of respect, the kind that no longer needed to be performed, and the trainee stood near the galley, her posture different now, more grounded, her eyes no longer searching but understanding, as if she had just witnessed something that clarified more than policy ever could, and the second attendant moved with a new level of precision, her actions measured, aligned, every step reflecting a recalibrated sense of responsibility, while the first attendant remained quieter than before, her movements careful, deliberate, as if she was navigating not just the cabin but the weight of what had already happened, and the woman who had taken the seat earlier returned slowly to her assigned place a few rows back, her steps controlled, her expression composed but altered, no longer defined by certainty, and when she sat down, she did not look around, she did not seek validation, she simply faced forward, the moment behind her but not erased, and Ethan sat in stillness, his gaze directed ahead, his posture unchanged, not withdrawn, not elevated, simply present, as if none of this required acknowledgement beyond what had already been understood, and the engines grew louder as the aircraft aligned with the runway, a steady rise in sound that filled the cabin, grounding everyone back into the physical reality of the flight. But even that could not fully overwrite what had just occurred, because moments like that did not disappear, they settled, they stayed, they reshaped the way people saw what had once felt ordinary, and as the plane accelerated, the pressure pressing lightly against each passenger's seat, the room moved forward together, but not the same as before, and the second attendant passed by Ethan's row once more, pausing just briefly, not to interrupt, not to perform, but to acknowledge, her voice low, professional, but sincere, "If there is anything you need, please let me know," and Ethan gave a small nod, not out of obligation, but out of recognition of the shift that had taken place, and she continued on, her step steady, her role now clearer than it had been minutes ago, and the trainee watched her go, then glanced once more toward Ethan, her expression thoughtful, as if she was storing this moment away, not as an exception, but as a lesson, and the aircraft lifted, the subtle release of weight marking the transition into the sky, and in that moment, suspended between ground and air, the cabin carried more than passengers, it carried a quiet understanding that what had happened was not just about a seat, it was about perception, about how quickly it forms and how slowly it corrects, and Ethan Carter remained exactly where he was, not elevated by the moment, not changed by it, just steady, the kind of presence that does not need recognition to be real, because it has always been there, whether others saw it or not. At 30,000 feet, the cabin settled into a rhythm that looked normal on the surface but carried something different underneath, a quiet recalibration that no announcement could capture, and the soft chime signaling that passengers could move about the cabin did not break that feeling, it only layered routine over reflection, and the second attendant moved down the aisle again, offering drinks with a composure that now felt intentional, each interaction measured, each word chosen with a care that had not been there before, while the first attendant remained further back, her role unchanged in title but altered in presence, her movements precise, almost restrained, as if she understood that something larger than a single moment had shifted and she was now operating within it, and the trainee followed at a slight distance, observing more than assisting, her attention drawn less to the service itself and more to the people, to how they carried themselves after what had happened, to how silence could say more than conversation, and across the cabin, passengers had begun to return to their routines, some opening laptops, others leaning back with headphones, but every so often a glance would drift forward toward Ethan's seat, subtle, unspoken, not intrusive but aware, as if the memory of what they had witnessed remained just beneath the surface of everything else, and Ethan sat exactly as he had before, composed, grounded, his attention now on a document open on his tablet, numbers and charts reflecting a world far removed from the aisle that had momentarily defined the space, and yet connected to it in ways no one else fully understood, and when the second attendant reached his row again, she paused briefly, her tone professional but carrying a quiet sincerity, "Mr. Carter, would you like anything to drink?" And Ethan looked up for just a moment, meeting her gaze. With the same calm presence, "Water is fine," he said, simple, unadorned, and she nodded, not as a routine acknowledgement, but as a response grounded in respect, before moving to prepare it, and a few rows back, the woman sat still, her posture composed but reflective, her eyes directed forward but unfocused, as if replaying the moment in her mind, not to defend it, not to justify it, but to understand it, and for the first time since the flight began, she did not look at anyone else for validation, she did not seek agreement or reassurance, she simply sat with the weight of it, and that weight was not loud, it did not demand attention, but it existed, steady and undeniable, and the man across the aisle leaned slightly toward his window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass, his expression thoughtful, as if what he had seen had shifted something in him as well, something small but lasting, and the trainee, passing by once more, slowed just enough to glance toward Ethan. Again, not with curiosity now, but with understanding, as if she recognized that what had happened was not just a single incident, but part of something larger, something that extended beyond one flight, one interaction, one decision, and as the plane continued forward, cutting steadily through the sky, the cabin carried that understanding with it, not as tension, not as conflict, but as a quiet awareness that would remain long after the wheels touched the ground, because some moments do not end when they are over, they continue, reshaping perception, redefining what people notice, what they question, what they choose to see, and Ethan Carter remained in his seat, unchanged by the recognition around him, because his position had never depended on it, and that, more than anything else, was what the room had finally begun to understand. By the time the aircraft began its descent, the cabin had settled into a calm that felt earned rather than routine, a quiet that carried memory instead of tension, and the subtle shift in altitude, the slight tilt of the plane as it aligned with its final path, seemed to mirror something internal, something that had already landed long before the wheels would touch the runway, and Ethan Carter remained composed, his attention returning once more to his work, his presence unchanged from the moment he first took his seat, because nothing about him had needed to change. It was the room that had adjusted, the people within it that had recalibrated their understanding, and as the announcement for landing echoed softly through the cabin, passengers straightened, trays were secured, screens dimmed, but beneath those small, routine movements, something deeper lingered, something that did not follow the standard checklist of a flight, and the woman sat quietly in her seat, her posture still, her gaze forward, not avoiding, not confronting, just present, as if she had reached a point where reflection no longer needed to be spoken to exist, and the first attendant moved with careful precision through the final checks, her actions steady but quieter than before, her earlier certainty replaced with a kind of awareness that showed in every measured step, while the second attendant carried herself with a clarity that had not been there at the start, her role no longer just procedural but understood, fully aligned with the responsibility it carried, and the trainee stood near the rear of the cabin, observing one last time, her expression thoughtful, as if she had taken something from this experience that no training manual could have given her, something that would shape how she saw every passenger from this point forward, not by appearance, not by assumption, but by presence, by the possibility that what she saw was never the full story. And the man across the aisle glanced once more toward Ethan, a brief look, respectful, acknowledging, before turning his attention forward again, and when the plane finally touched down, the soft but unmistakable contact with the runway grounding everyone back into reality, the moment did not disappear, it settled, it carried forward with each person as they prepared to leave, and as the aircraft taxied toward the gate, the cabin slowly came back to life. Seat belts unclicked, overhead bins opened, conversations resumed in low tones, but even then, something remained different, something quieter, more aware, and Ethan stood when it was time, not rushing, not waiting, simply moving with the same calm presence he had carried from the beginning, and as he stepped into the aisle, the space opened again, not out of obligation, not out of instruction, but out of recognition, and he moved forward without looking back, without needing to, because the moment had already completed itself, it had already said what it needed to say, and for those who had witnessed it, the message did not need repetition, it existed in the silence, in the shift, in the understanding that respect is not something granted based on perception, it is something revealed when perception fails, and Ethan Carter walked off the plane exactly as he had walked on, unannounced, unshaken, and entirely unchanged, because the truth of who he was had never been dependent on who recognized it, only on who was willing to see it.